My name is Parham. Today is January the 22nd, 2003, and I was in the Pentagon on September the 11th, 2001. I work for the Army as a librarian in the Office of the Deputy Chief of Staff for Personnel. I'm responsible for the Army's policy on libraries. My office on September the 11th was in the new Wedge, the recently renovated space. The door was 2E 465, and it was directly across the hall from the Commanding General's office, which is the point of impact on September the 11th. I was in the large area, the big open bay that was filled with workstations that I jokingly call Dilbertville when we moved in there. My workstation was backed up to a copy machine room, and just to the left of it was an aisleway with 3 other workstations. And one of those workstations at the end was where one of my librarian trainees sat, and fortunately that day she was at Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. The other 2 workstations, the ones closest to the E-ring wall, were occupied by congressional liaison staff, and only one of them was there that day. And that's where the television was that we watched, where we watched the planes hit the towers in New York that morning. After the first one hit, we were called around the corner to the television to see what was going on, and of course a number of people went around to watch that, including me. And we were all horrified at what we saw, and comments were made about the Pentagon being ground zero, but none of us moved to leave because we all had work to do. Fortunately, I didn't stay there very long. I went back to work, and went back to my workstation and was moving around the office and just getting work done. And at about 8:30, or at the time of the impact, I was not at my desk. I was standing almost in the aisle across from those 3 workstations. I was standing on the far side of the workstations. I was headed back to my desk after having sent a fax, and there were lots of people around. There were lots of people in that work area where the television was. There were a lot of people in that aisleway as well. But all of a sudden there was this violent concussion and the most deafening noise. The lights went out. All I remember is things falling from the ceiling, flying through the air. It was a haze, a white haze. You couldn't see anything. And all of a sudden I was alone. I mean, even though there had been people around before, I was suddenly alone. And I had the most horrible feeling of being under attack. It's a feeling I can't describe adequately now. I hope I never feel it again, but I knew immediately that we had been attacked. And I think I was knocked to the ground. I was also hit on the head with what later turned out to be a ceiling tile, because I found pieces of it in my pocket, but at the time I didn't know what it was. I know that and it could have happened simultaneously with the crash, with the impact, that I was knocked to the floor, hit with the ceiling tile, because the flames, the fireball, came through our office, came through the ceiling, and blew out the ceiling tiles, and consequently I lost hair on the top of my head. Didn't know it at the time. I knew that I also got wet. Didn't know then that it was jet fuel, but I knew that I was wet and dripping. And after the impact, I think I was at the point of impact, I was knocked to the floor, and when I got myself up, I was standing in front of a workstation, and off in the crevice between where the walls of the workstation came together, I could see flames, and there was the most intense heat I've ever felt in my life. It was like sucking the oxygen right out of the air, and I knew that if I didn't get out of there quickly, I was either going to suffocate or burn to death. So I began to make my way down away from the heat because I felt it all around me. And again, unbeknownst to me at the time, there was fire behind me, because about that, immediately after the impact, I yelled for my coworker, Patrick Smith, and I don't remember hearing him, but he heard me, and when he said when he saw me later that I was silhouetted against the flame, which was behind me. So I began to make my way down the aisle of workstations, and I didn't at the time. I was so disoriented. I did not know how far I had to go. I just knew that I needed to get away from the heat and to get to some air. Otherwise, I was not going to make it. And so I began to walk, feeling my way along the desktop. And then I ran into something, and when I did, I had a momentary thought that, is this where I'm going to die? And I knew that I couldn't stop because I didn't want my mother to get that kind of news. I knew she wouldn't like that. So I kept moving, and again ran into something and kind of didn't know where to go, and I guess just took another step forward, and all of a sudden it seemed to be, in some ways it was an eternity, and in others I don't think it was that long, but I suddenly saw, it's a cliche I know, but light at the end of a tunnel. I felt like I was in London in the fog looking through a tunnel, and way in the distance, a long way in the distance, at the end of that tunnel was a man standing there waving me in his direction. So I began to walk in that direction, and about that time Patrick Smith came along and helped guide me out because I was very disoriented. We walked out, and we've talked many times since then about how we got out because we were not sure which door we went out. We found out later that the fire doors in the fourth corridor closed, so we could not have gone out the way that we normally went into our office. So I vaguely remember that we sort of had to do a dog leg, do some twisting and turning to get out, so we figured out that we came out through the door on the C ring, and then went back into the door on the B ring, and eventually went through that office and came out on the A ring, came out of a door on the A ring because the fire doors on the fourth corridor had closed and people were unable to get out that way. Once we got out into the corridor, it was a very orderly evacuation. There was no one running, but we were walking very quickly. I was burning at that point. I mean, my face and my hands and my eyes were burning, and I knew that I was wet. I didn't know with what. I knew that there was an awful smell, which really bothered me, and I was very tempted to stop in a restroom and wash my face, but we decided it was better just to leave the building immediately. Patrick and I both, without even mentioning it, sort of recognized that there might be a second plane because we knew that there had been two in New York. So neither of us wanted to go to the center courtyard, so I suggested we go to the 8th corridor so that we could go to North Parking and, if necessary, go to the river. So we headed in that direction, and we either went out the river or the mall entrance, and when we got there, there were lots of people, and it was, I got a little claustrophobic and nervous, but we managed to get out, and I think it was at that point that as we saw people, I really didn't want to look at people because I knew when they saw what we looked like, they would be terrified, and I was already terrified enough without seeing it in their eyes. But I did hear comments, and unbeknownst to me, the back of my jacket across the shoulders was all scorched, and there were holes in the back of the jacket. My face, I'm sure, was red, and Patrick's arms were red because he had been burned as well, and there were holes in his shirt too. So we looked like we had come out of a fire, and I'm sure that was frightening to people around us who thought that it was perhaps just a regular fire drill. We made our way out across the parade ground on the riverside because I was afraid again to walk across the bridge going to the POAC. So we walked across that parade field outside the river entrance and down to the road, and someone led us to a Defense Protective Service car, and which then took us to Alexandria Hospital. Despite all the bedlam, they were wonderful. They managed to get us to Alexandria Hospital, and I think we were the first ones there. We ran into the hospital, and they immediately opened the doors and took us in and treated us. I had second-degree burns on my face, my ears, and my hands, and this is the way I looked on September the 14th when I went to a plastic surgeon for treatment. I know it's a lot different, and it's maybe hard to believe, but that's the way I looked afterwards. Modern medicine is really wonderful in treating burns. I'm very fortunate, truly blessed to be alive. And that's just an added bonus that I came out of it without any kind of scars at all. But we were treated at Alexandria Hospital that day. Within a few hours, I was home and spent the day with friends there, and telephone calls from people who later told me when they talked to me I was talking a mile a minute, because I was very disoriented and obviously very under a great deal of stress, traumatized from the experience. We watched some of the events the rest of the day, but it was very difficult to watch. And later in the day, when we saw the building, part of the building collapse, I recognized that that part appeared to be where we had come from, and sure enough, that was part of our office. And we lost 24 of our co-workers that day in our organization alone, 8 in the commanding general's office. So we lost quite a number of people. I'm very blessed to be alive today, and just very, very fortunate, and hopefully am a better person for whatever traumatic experience I had to go through. But I'm just glad that it's over.